But in general, all the investors like to see different time points so that they can see your progress. So I started talking to a lot of people very early, even when all I had was a napkin sketch or basically just a concept. And I said, this is what I'm trying. But then when you go back to the same investor in a fairly short amount of time with a less amount of capital and you have shown progress, then they see the potential in terms of, okay, definitely that's a good delta that they see, and then that gives confidence.
Hi everyone, we are here today in St. Paul with Ramji Iyer, the founder and CEO of Laplace Interventional. And this is the Medtech Startup Podcast, where we are about to get inside the head, the hearts, and the guts of this medtech entrepreneur. And I'm very fortunate. I have known Ramji for a long time.
That's right.
Back when you were over at St. Jude Medical. So I think the best way we could first start this whole interview and discussion is figuring out who you are and how you've built your entire life, academic, your professional career, leading up to the time that you had the guts to go out and start a company yourself. So Ramji, where are you from? How'd you get here? How'd you start Laplace? That entire life spectrum, who are you?
First of all, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here and talking to you. And yes, we have known each other for a very long time. Yeah, so I was born and raised in India until my undergrad. I did seriously consider going into medicine for my undergrad, but ended up picking up engineering for two reasons. One, I got into a really good school, and two, a lot of my friends also got into the same school, so I said, okay, taking up engineering, and so mechanical engineering it was. Came here to Minnesota for my graduate studies, did my master's and PhD, and my first job out of grad school was at St. Jude Medical, where interestingly I took up a role in operations, partly because I thought moving to an R&D type of environment would be easier given my, let's say, PhD. And anyway, spent 5 years there, worked on several things, primarily structural heart or cardiovascular / structural heart space, worked on the baby mechanical heart valve, worked on the surgical tissue heart valve, worked on their TAVR device, briefly worked on renal denervation. And then after that, there was always a desire to understand startup and be part of a startup with the goal of ultimately starting sometime. I didn't know how, but I thought the best way to do that would be to go work in a startup, and that's exactly what I told when I was interviewing for Caisson as well. Anyway, so I met Todd and CJ, who were the founders of Caisson Interventional, actually even before they had office space in a hotel room. It was very exciting, and started as an engineer, did a lot of different things at Caisson. I was the second engineer who was hired and ended up leading the R&D there. Spent 7 years there. Along the way, saw Caisson being acquired by LivaNova as well, and then in 2020, I decided to start Laplace. So I was also consulting a little bit, but was figuring out what space to look into, and then ended up picking up Laplace. And I started Laplace in August of 2020. And here we are, have an exciting team, exciting technology. It's been a phenomenal journey, to be honest. I'm extremely happy and extremely pleased.
So now here we are, you founded and now are leading as CEO for Laplace Interventional. Tell us what the technology is, and then tell us where the company is to date.
Yeah, Laplace is a transcatheter tricuspid valve replacement company, and like I said, it started the company in August 2020, and at that time it was just me. I was self-funded partly by some friends and family, and then also a small grant from the Minnesota state. It's the Launch MN grant. It's relatively small, but at that time it was extremely crucial. And I have everything put together. It was a little less than 150,000, enough to do, let's say, one animal study, enough to file a provisional patent, enough to do all the bench testing, do some early prototyping. But I think that's where Minnesota overall has been extremely helpful as an ecosystem. Given that I've spent a lot of time in the space in general, transcatheter heart valve space in general, I knew what I wanted to basically go convince the initial investor. At that point, to be honest, I was looking at, it could be a seed, it could be a Series A. I was open. I wasn't necessarily looking for something, but I knew what had to be raised to get to where I need to get to. At least that was fairly clear in my head. Anyway, so Series A was raised only in September of 21. That was 7.9 million, and then after that we Now we have 13 full-time employees. We have approximately about 25, 26 FTEs. We have a 5,000 square foot office space. We built an R&D lab, built a clean room. Most importantly, have shown great feasibility data in bench, in animals, and making good progress overall, working towards our clinical feasibility. And recently, we also closed our Series B round, which you know how difficult the climate is. So yeah, extremely proud of our team's accomplishments here.
So I was thinking about asking it later on, but I want to get right off of it because of everything you just shared. In the grand scheme of things, it's a transcatheter tricuspid valve replacement technology.
Yeah.
We all know, I shouldn't say we all know, but anyone who's privy to the space, this is not a chip shot where you're going to get in and get out in a couple of years. This is a long haul.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the proudful things that you are about your company is how fast you've made it, how far you've made it, how quickly you've done it. What do you attribute that to?
I think it's the team. I mean, it's simply, we do have a rockstar team, and I'm extremely proud that I was able to bring it together, played my role in bringing it together. But although it's a small team, it's really very, if you count the number of years in terms of total experience that the team has, there's plenty. And everyone plays their role, and everyone comes together, and we argue, debate in a healthy way. One of the things that I always tell my team is about optimally balancing data with good judgment and good analytical skill sets, and able to get to a conclusion quicker. Sometimes we make bad decisions too, but I would say for us to be here, we should have made a lot more good decisions than bad.
In the spirit of the entrepreneurial spirit, you went from white sheet of paper, right? So this quick consulting phase, you're like, okay, I'm going to go start this company.
Yeah.
Once again, not in the easiest space to innovate.
Yeah.
And then 3 years, now here you are.
Yeah.
So I want to get into the fact of you going from a big corporation like St. Jude, getting that very early on experience within Kazon, but still not leading that helm, right? You've had both startup experience and corporate experience. Do you attribute that to having a nice recipe to give you that success and confidence to go do your own thing?
I think so. I think the St. Jude experience was a good way to come from academia to a corporate environment where you could understand the building blocks of why certain things exist. You have to live that to experience all of that. So I think the first 5 years I was working on certain projects and certain technologies that I'm extremely proud of, but at the same time it gave me a good exposure to how things need to be done, why are certain processes and structures in place to develop a product, all of that. So definitely that was a good foundational experience. And then Kazon was, I think I was a sponge in terms of just whatever any scenario or any person I had terrific people to work alongside. I had terrific mentors there in terms of the two founders, and it was just such a great environment to learn about so many things, product, technology. Things are obviously, in some sense, chaotic in a startup. There's too many things going on, and you're always, but despite that, it's important to just have a structure and have a systematic process that you can work through, and that discipline, all of that existed, and I learned a ton there. So yeah, I'm trying to apply all of that in Laplace, and I think we've done good so far.
So you mentioned the word mentor, and sorry for throwing you on the spot, but where you are in your life, the big corporates, having the startup experience, and now running your own thing. Any mentor you want to give a shout out to? Yeah,
absolutely. I think Todd Mortier, whom I reported to all throughout at Kazon, and CJ Schweig, they are the two founders of Kazon. They founded MyoCore as well, and they are serial entrepreneurs, and I have an extreme amount of respect for them and everything that I've learned from them, and again, continue to be great mentors.
The one entrepreneur lesson, one of many, that I want to learn from you today is, if you could speak to a room of entrepreneurs who are engineers at Abbott, Medtronic, or at some other startup right now who are just salivating on one day starting their own idea, what don't they know about being a CEO? What was that transition from, okay, fine, it was nitty gritty and very different at Kazon from the big resourceful corporate giant that you were at St. Jude, but there is a difference of starting and leading and running your own company.
Right.
What's the role of a CEO in your opinion, in your learned opinion now?
Sure.
And what is those learning lessons that you had to go through?
I think given the space or area that we are in, which is medtech, it's tech. It is extremely technical. So maybe I'm biased, but I do think engineers make great CEOs, which might be a little contrary to some of the other opinions that I've at least heard. But I similar to, let's say, software, I do think medtech needs a lot more engineers to become more CEOs. So I think as engineers, there's generally a lot of questioning, and you generally want to generate a lot of data to drive through certain aspects of it. In terms of what I think is a CEO's role, I think it's primarily to set vision and also direction for the company. And where that becomes important is basically when things are not clear, right? The obvious ones everyone knows, especially in a small team, you know what needs to get done. It's during times of uncertainties that you as a CEO can actually provide clarity by providing a certain direction. So that was something that I thought was very important, and I continue to think that. I think that's, in my opinion, one of the biggest role of a CEO. And then a lot of times, essentially, there are so many things that need to be done, so I'm almost essentially fluidic enough that I fill the gap, so to speak. Obviously, I need to make sure that I need to have more and more people build out the team in a structured way so that we don't get constrained from a lack of resource standpoint. But I think I look at my role as almost fluidic to bring everything together and just filling the gap, so to speak. Yeah.
Is it challenging for you now that you've built out the team and you still have more room to grow, I'm sure? Is it challenging for you to be that fluid profile that brings everything together rather than being that awesome design hands-on engineer that you loved?
To be honest, I enjoy both the roles, and I like to be focused at times, and I like to have that broad perspective also. It is challenging, but in a good way, in a healthy way, right? I mean, it's working out is not easy, but when you finish that, you feel good. Running a marathon is not easy. When you finish it, you feel good. Similar to that, it's hard, but in a healthy way. Yeah. I think it does stimulate me, and I find it very satisfying.
So first-time CEO, first-time fundraiser.
Yeah.
So you talked about having friends and family and a grant from Minnesota that was slightly less than $150,000, and then all of a sudden this press release comes out and you've raised $7.9 million in a Series A. From being the engineer and reiterating everything that we've already talked about, where did you even learn and what did you even start as your first step in learning how to raise capital?
Yeah, I think you've built a network, right? Throughout the years, I talked about the mentors, and I did have a good amount of people to start with. Probably because I was first-time CEO, I didn't know. I had a goal in mind, and essentially a lot of discussions, a lot of talking to different people. It was multiple meetings, and through that, I navigated through the space. There was a little bit of strategy, obviously, in terms of how do I spend the time. I would also say that I did spend a good amount of time, initially at least, talking to a lot of investors, where now I probably wouldn't. Just trying to be mindful of which investors target which therapeutic areas and whatnot. And even medtech is fairly broad. Cardiovascular is specific, PMA versus 510K is different. All these different things mean certain things to investors, and you can get these answers fairly quick. You don't have to go through a full-blown pitch and do all that. I think it took me a little bit time to figure that out, but it was also a good time to keep pitching and keep improving your pitch. So there's always some positive. So it's all of that. Yeah.
I deal with a lot of startups and I deal with a lot of first-time founders, and it's been a tough year and a half of hearing people trying to raise capital, especially after this big boom of 2021 and even early 2022. Yeah. But a lot of the times, even in Class 3 devices, I'm hearing these founders who they scrape together that 100 or 200,000 or maybe even 50,000 up front. Yeah. They did what they could with it, but now they're raising this seed round and it's 500,000 or 2 million or 850,000, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
You're an engineer, and you mentioned engineers should and do make good CEOs.
Yeah.
How did you engineer in your head in that learning process of just saying, okay, I have a little bit less than 150,000, screw it, I'm going right for my Series A and I'm bypassing the seed round. What was that?
Yeah, so there was not, it was less of seed versus Series A versus all the different nomenclature. It was more about what do I need to go from where I am to basically to a next meaningful milestone, right? And initially I did consider raising maybe a little less, maybe somewhere in that 4 to 5 million, but I don't think I could have gone that far with $1 million or $2 million. So I would have called it a Series A no matter what, whether it was 4 or 5 versus 8 million, that's basically can be debated. But I wanted that much so that then I can show some meaningful progress. So that, because I think that is something that every CEO should be looking for. I think what is that next uptick in terms of building the company? And for us, it was showing preclinical feasibility, sufficient so that there is, now we feel that there can be more funds being raised to go on to the clinical feasibility. So that was really the key factor that played a role on how much to raise.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't easy, but a lot of times, that's where all this filtering that I mentioned in terms of, if you look at how many investors are there who do that 7, 8 million, after, let's say, a 150K raise, PMA type company, not that many. You can really narrow it down to few.
So, out of the styles of investors that you have successfully raised from, both even in your Series A and Series B. So we have, objectively speaking, we have angels and angel groups and family offices and corporate venture, and we have foundations, and we have healthcare system venture arms. There's a lot of different styles of investors. What types of investors have you raised from?
Yeah, for Series A, that was led by a strategic, and then Shanghai Capital participated as well. We also had Mayo Clinic participating in that round. So those were I would say, the major investors. And then after that, in Series B, we had Features Capital, and Shanghai was the lead. Shanghai, along with Features, co-led the Series B round. And then we had Engage Venture Partners, saw that you met Kelly recently, and then we had a few others as well. Yeah.
We like to talk about this just because it's the psychology of capital. Sure. When you're putting your first time pitch decks together, and I'm sure even at Kazon you've seen some of the pitch decks because you were part of at least the awareness of Kazon having to raise, but now in your own company, when you are going and talking to a strategic, big multinational, or you're talking to an institutional investor, or Mayo Clinic, a hospital healthcare venture arm, do they all have different motivations and different needs and wants, and then the story that you're pitching your same technology, does it have to change?
Yeah, I think the pitch to some extent, yes, but I'll tell you the things that I gave importance to. So I think given the space that we are in, by that, lance catheter, let's say, and so I wanted to reach out to strategics right from the beginning, where the general, I wouldn't say all the advice, but general, I was getting some advice that it's too early for strategics, why don't you go in after some time, etc. But I decided to, partly because I think the strategics have spent the time developing a TAVR device or acquiring a TAVR technology or technologies, acquiring mitral technologies and digesting it, and still digesting it, and probably have some internal tricuspid programs or have invested in some other tricuspid. So we all know that. And given that, I thought they would understand the space really well, right? So they've really spent a lot of time dealing with what works, what doesn't. I thought I should definitely talk to them, at least see. So that was one approach that I took. So I would say that it is important to pay importance to whom you need to talk to based on what space you're working in. So second, I think coming to hospitals, I think again, primary customers are interventional cardiologists, cardiac surgeons, given the type of technology that we're working on. I looked at all the key interventional cardiologists in this space and how closely do they work with their venture arm. I was trying to gather that information, and I would just ask some of the physicians, and based on that, I talked to certain ventures in the hospitals. So that was something that I used to get into some venture arms and certain. So I thought that was, at least that was successful for Laplace.
On the corporate side,
Sure.
they're big behemoths. Time is not really that much of an issue because they're at the end of the food chain.
Yeah.
When you start dealing with institutional investors that have time horizons and they're having to return their money back to their own LPs, et cetera, what were some of the processes that you had to learn, or just go out and find the right partners? But how do you convince institutional investors to get on board so early for such a intense technology?
Yeah, I think a lot of times there is going to be, I would say most institutional VCs would fall, and they've already made up their mind in terms of, are they going to go for a PMA long-term play or not? I think that kind of initial filter, I think you can find out even in the initial discussions. I think just by asking, I think, so that was the first filter. And then after that, I think there might be few that may do it, may not do it. There's a little bit of, it depends. To them, I think you have to present the technology and the opportunity that it really presents, and a lot of this applies to strategic as well. But in general, all the investors like to see different time points so that they can see your progress. So I started talking to a lot of people very early. Even when all I had was a napkin sketch or basically just a concept, and I said, this is what I'm trying to. But then when you go back to the same investor in a fairly short amount of time with a less amount of capital, and you have shown progress, then they see the potential in terms of, okay, definitely that's a good delta that they see, and then that gives confidence, and that applies to any investor, and that's how we all think about investing in general. So we want to see a growth. So trying to talk to them, I would say talk more early as possible in some sense, so that you can show that growth.
And when you have, like you mentioned, Shengbei came in on the Series A.
Yeah.
How does that relationship develop, or what does it mean when they continue on to the next round? And not only that, but lead it. What signal does that send when you're raising?
Clearly, I think they see all the positives of the company, and they continue to see the growth of the company, and I think it's a reflection of that. So I think it's definitely a very strong signal, and I'm hopeful that they'll participate in the future rounds as well. And
And then going back to the educational mechanics of it, never having raised capital before, like the lexicon, safes, equity priced rounds, convertible notes, preferred versus common. Did you read books, and did you have to just ask? Did you have all these mentors? How you make it sound so easy, but I'm sure there was a really good learning process that came along.
There was. See, so there's the math and the finance behind it, and then there is the art of fundraising, right? The negotiations. So I'm pretty sure all engineers will ace the math part of it. Yes, there is nuances to it, and you have to spend the time. But again, these are all engineers who have solved much more complex problems. So that's why I feel that the math part of it, yes, I learned about SAFE, some of the VWare, and then I learned about all the price-based equity rounds, all of these. But those are things that can be learned. It's the language that you have to learn and how everything works out. The nuances or the art of fundraising, so to speak, that's the part that, again, comes by doing it multiple times, talking to more people, and then building that relationship, and then, like I said, showing that growth, so to speak, all of that. So I think that's what it takes to convince someone.
Closing up on the actual raising piece,
Yeah.
in your opinion, and maybe even some of the nuances,
Yeah.
which was harder, Series A or Series B?
I was told that Series B would be easier than Series A. I don't know if it was because of the climate, or I think both were hard, and it took time. It does take time, and I think multiple people have told me that fundraising never really stops. You just you have to just keep at it, because it's never easy. And again, I think the focus, ultimately it comes down to, if you're building a good technology, good company, and you're adding value, I think it may take time, it may take slightly longer than what you desired, but it'll happen, I think. So that's what I continue to believe in.
You came all the way to Minnesota from India.
Yeah.
You were educated here. You've spent and built your career here. So you have both the corporate and the startup again from here.
Yeah.
What's so great about the Twin Cities? Like, where does this fall in the ecosystem of medical device, and why is it a fertile ground for entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think Minnesota is great, just from the talent that Minnesota presents. Great schools, great engineers, great corporates, St. Jude, of course, and Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, great hospitals, Mayo Clinic, Abbott Northwestern, the VA, and then the startup ecosystem. I think there are so many contract manufacturers, design prototyping house that you can tap into, irrespective of the stage of the company. If you're in very early stage, still trying to get some prototyping going, there are places that you can go to. If you are early to mid-stage company, there are places that you can go to. Or if you're commercial and you're basically, there's still multiple places that you can go to. So I think that offering is great, and that's what makes Minnesota special. So.
How's the ecosystem of the investor climate around here?
Yeah.
Or does it force you to have to go to the coasts?
So we do go to the coast. I would say rather than coast, basically go global at this point. And I know of several companies that have, brought in funds from Asia, from Europe, from South America. You name it, there are always instances. I would say from an investment standpoint, yes, there are a few large VCs as well here that invest in medtech space, but there are a few other. If you have to go larger, you do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then in the space that you're actually innovating in, it's 2023, 10 years ago was 2013.
Yeah.
Core valve was already acquired, PVT was already acquired in the TAVI space, E-valve was already acquired in the mitral repair space. But fast forwarding all these years, here we are in 2023. You just got back from TCT.
Yeah.
Where are we in terms of when you think about the 4 heart valves and innovation from transcatheter perspective? Like, where's the industry today?
I think TCT was great. First of all, I think this was maybe the second TCT after, let's say, post-COVID. So it was nice to see everyone, and it was huge, but it's still such a close-knit group. In terms of TAVR, I think it started off with prohibitive or inoperable risk patients, and then moved on to high risk, then moved on to moderate. Now we are in low risk. So I think the field has come long ways, and both Sapien and Corval presented their data seemed very positive. In terms of mitral repair, I think again what CLIP has done to the overall field, both CLIP and Pascal, the tier basically has moved the field so much forward. So mitral replacement is still early. I think there is still no one or 2 or 3 solutions, but everyone is fighting for that spot, which is great to see. Tricuspid has come in a long ways too. It's no longer the forgotten valve. People have TriClip data was shown earlier, but then Evoke 6 months data was shown at TCT. The fact that patients do well when you treat TR is important for the field, and it's important for Laplace, but it's important for everyone in this field.
And you and I were talking about this. You mentioned that, especially when it comes to either building a business or certainly raising capital, you mentioned the space that you work in matters a lot.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I think the technology that you're developing, that's what I meant by space. But basically, I think, and throughout this conversation, we've touched on that a little bit here and there, the complex technology like a transcatheter heart valve replacement, you're developing a valve, you're developing usually a set of catheters, not just one catheter. It's simple to say delivery system, but that's a combination of 3 or 4 catheters. And then you're also developing a procedure. So it's complex. So based on that, the capital required is substantial. It takes long duration before the investors get their return on the investment. So all things considered, I think you have to make sure that when I say space, it's the technology that you're really developing. You have to consider all these factors and then decide on whom to talk, when to talk, how frequently to talk, all of those.
And then going back to the fundraising itself, coming out of this challenging year, how do you handle the no's and how do you handle the challenges when you have like the naysayers and the disbelievers, but you still have a great track record and you still are making great progress? Like, How do you handle that own psychology when you're out there raising capital with all these no's?
Again, let's face it, no one likes being told no, and I'm no different. But having said that, they usually have, the good investors usually have a reason, and I try to understand what that is and then try to basically work on it and then go back and show that. A lot of times, like I said, it takes time before they get comfortable with investing, and you just have to keep at it and then show progress and then go back to them. And a lot of times when I have that relationship over a reasonable amount of time and shown progress, that actually has worked out well.
A lot of investors call medtech hard tech, and that's objectively speaking. You're in a really hard portion of hard tech, medtech, and innovation is not going to stop. So once again, having known you for all these years, and now you've taken on all this experience, and you've now built a team and built a company and raised all this money. If you have to speak to a room of entrepreneurs who, once again, are going to be in your shoes one day, they want to go out and start a company, they want to start building their own technology and turn it into a company. Knowing what you've learned and what you've known about entrepreneurship, what would you tell yourself 12 years ago, 10 years ago? What would you tell all these entrepreneurs about what to expect being in your shoes now?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one is, I think one should try to learn the operational aspect of it. I think once you have raised funds, how to run a company is best learned by working in a startup. So I think if you can, I think that's something that one should. I think it teaches you how cost efficient you can be, how lean you can be, and still make a lot of progress. In some sense, I think that lean or lack of resources fosters creativity in some sense. It forces you to be creative, and that's a great way to learn how to run a startup. So I think, so that is one. Why that is important is then you will be able to communicate to your potential investors that you, especially when you are a first-time CEO, the only thing you have is a track record because you haven't done that. So I think showing some experience of ability to execute when funded, I think will give the investors some confidence. So I think that's something that I would say is valuable. The other part is, again, look, yes, I've raised some funds and I'm extremely happy, but it's still the beginning. If you look at everyone else in the field, how much they have, still a long ways to go. So all I would say is just start. Once you feel everyone has this internal scale where they feel they are ready to start, or I think sometimes it's just good to start doing it, and a lot of things will fall in place if you're disciplined and if you keep doing in a systematic fashion. You will run into some roadblocks, which is fine, but you should be able to overcome it if you have a good system and a good practice and if you're disciplined. So yeah.
My last fun question for you is the name. So interventional certainly speaks for itself, but Laplace Interventional, how'd you come up with the name and decide to run with that?
Yeah, the stress in your heart wall is governed by Laplace law. So it's the name of the scientist who came up with that equation, so to speak. And I do believe people make big impact, that's why Laplace Interventional.
Laplace Interventional. Ramji, I'd like to say thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And for all those watching and listening in today, this is the Medtech Startup Podcast, where we just got inside the head, the heart, no pun intended, and the guts of this medical device entrepreneur, Ramji Iyer, founder and CEO of Laplace Interventional. Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.